So you've probably seen the headlines about Amazon workers walking out in California, right? Everyone's talking about greedy corporations, unfair labor practices, workers standing up to their rights. And look, I get it. That's the story we're used to hearing. But here's the thing nobody's really connecting the dots on. And once you see it, this whole situation looks completely different. This isn't just another Amazon versus workers story. This is about what happens when state policy decisions collide with economic reality. And honestly, what's playing out right now in California is something every single state needs to pay attention to, because this could happen anywhere. Let me walk you through what's actually going on here. And trust me, by the end of this, you're going to see these walkouts in a totally new light. It all started with California's environmental push, which on paper sounds great, right? Who doesn't want cleaner air and lower emissions? But here's where it gets interesting. The state passed these incredibly strict emissions regulations, specifically targeting logistics facilities, warehouses, fulfillment centers, all those massive buildings where your packages get sorted and shipped. Now, these weren't just guidelines or suggestions. These were hard requirements with serious deadlines. And those deadlines, they started hitting this year. So imagine you're running a fulfillment center that's been operating for years, everything's working fine, and suddenly you're told you need to completely retrofit your entire facility to meet brand new environmental standards. We're talking about upgrading ventilation systems, installing new equipment, changing out entire fleets of forklifts and machinery, replacing loading dock infrastructure, updating electrical systems to handle new equipment, and the price tag? Tens of millions of dollars per large facility. And here's the kicker that nobody saw coming. The state didn't offer any real financial support up front. No grants, no tax breaks that actually mattered, nothing that would genuinely help these companies absorb what is essentially a massive, unexpected expense. Companies were given compliance deadlines, but not compliance assistance, which, if you think about it, is like telling someone they need to renovate their entire house by next month, but offering zero help with the cost. But wait, because it gets even more complicated, and this is where the timing becomes absolutely critical to understanding why everything fell apart. Right after dropping this emissions bombshell, California turned around and implemented a warehouse-specific minimum wage increase. Now, higher wages for workers sounds like a good thing, and in isolation it absolutely is, but timing matters here. Companies were already staring down tens of millions in compliance costs, and now their labor expenses were about to jump significantly too. Think about that for a second. You're a business facing two massive cost increases hitting at almost the same time, both mandated by the state, both unavoidable, both with firm deadlines. What would you do? And remember, these aren't just abstract corporate decisions we're talking about. Every choice a company makes in response to these pressures directly affects real people, real families, real paychecks. Here's what Amazon did, and this is where the story starts getting really messy, and where you start to see how good intentions can create terrible outcomes. They started cutting hours. Then they froze hiring. Then came the layoffs. And I know what you're thinking, classic corporate cost cutting, right? But here's the twist that makes this whole thing so frustrating, and honestly kind of heartbreaking. Workers ended up earning less money overall, even though their hourly wage went up. Let that sink in for a moment. You're making more per hour, but working fewer hours, so your paycheck actually shrinks. That's not a win. That's just math working against you, and it's exactly the opposite of what these policies were supposed to achieve. Imagine being a warehouse worker. You hear the news that your hourly wage is going up, you're excited, you're thinking about how this extra money is going to help with rent or groceries or maybe finally fixing your car, and then your hours get slashed. Maybe you were working 40 hours a week, now you're down to 25 or 30. That wage increase you were counting on, it just evaporated, and you're actually worse off than before. And it wasn't just about cutting costs at individual facilities either, because Amazon had another option that workers in California didn't anticipate. Amazon started shifting fulfillment volume to warehouses in other states, places where they weren't dealing with the same regulatory pressure and cost structure. Think about it from a business perspective. If you've got facilities in Nevada, Arizona, Texas, or Oregon, and they don't have these same compliance costs and wage structures, why wouldn't you shift operations there? It's basic economics. Operations at several California facilities got scaled back dramatically, which meant even fewer hours for workers who were still there, and in some cases, entire facilities running at reduced capacity. So now you've got warehouses that used to run 3 full shifts operating at maybe 1.5 shifts. You've got workers who used to have stable, predictable schedules now scrambling to figure out how to make ends meet, and you've got entire communities that depend on these jobs watching their local economy take a hit. So now you've got workers who were promised better wages but are taking home less money, working under more stressful conditions because there are fewer people doing the same amount of work, dealing with the constant anxiety of wondering if more cuts are coming, and they're understandably upset about it. And honestly, can you blame them? From their perspective, they did nothing wrong. They showed up, they did their jobs, they worked hard, they followed the rules, and suddenly their livelihoods are being squeezed. They're seeing their coworkers get laid off. They're watching their own hours disappear. They're struggling to pay bills that were manageable before. And when they look for someone to blame, they see Amazon. They don't see the state regulations, they don't see the policy decisions, they see their employer making cuts. So what happened next? Coordinated walkouts. Workers at multiple California facilities started walking off the job together, organized, making noise, demanding answers, and honestly, demanding justice for what they're experiencing. And these weren't small disruptions. We're talking about supply chain delays, packages sitting in limbo, deliveries getting pushed back days or even weeks. And here's something most people aren't thinking about. It's not just Amazon customers that got affected. Small businesses that rely on Amazon's fulfillment network to get their products to customers, they got caught in the crossfire too. Their inventory is stuck, their sales are delayed, they're getting angry customer calls, they're potentially losing repeat business, and they're losing money through no fault of their own. Some of these small business owners are facing their own crisis because they can't get products to customers, they can't fulfill orders, and their entire business model depends on reliable logistics. But here's where this situation goes from bad to worse, and where you really start to see how this isn't just an Amazon problem. This isn't just an Amazon problem anymore. Other logistics companies, other distribution centers in California started experiencing similar issues. Same pattern. Compliance costs plus wage increases equals operational cuts equals frustrated workers. It's spreading because the underlying cause isn't company-specific. It's the policy environment itself. You're seeing it at other major retailers, you're seeing it at independent logistics companies, you're seeing it anywhere that runs a large warehouse operation in California. And now here's the part that really gets me, and I say this as someone who genuinely believes workers deserve fair treatment and good wages and safe working conditions. The state government's response has been almost comically inadequate. California officials came out publicly supporting the workers, talking about corporate accountability, standing with labor, all the usual talking points, doing photo ops with union leaders, making speeches about workers' rights, but they completely ignored their own role in creating this mess. Nobody in Sacramento wanted to admit that maybe, just maybe, implementing 2 massive cost increases simultaneously without proper transition support or economic impact assessment or any kind of realistic timeline was a bad idea. Nobody wanted to say, hey, we might have made a mistake in how we rolled this out. The governor's office eventually announced some kind of limited relief fund after enough political pressure built up, after businesses started making noise, after the walkouts made national news, but from what we're hearing, it's nowhere near enough to actually address the scale of the problem. It's like watching someone set a building on fire and then showing up with a water pistol claiming they're helping, making a big show of doing something while the building continues to burn. And look, I want to be clear about something here because I know how these conversations can go. I'm not anti-regulation, I'm not anti-worker, I'm not some corporate apologist. I think environmental standards matter, and I think workers absolutely deserve fair wages and good working conditions, and I think California has every right to set high standards for both. But policy implementation matters just as much as policy intention, maybe even more. You can have the best goals in the world, you can have the most noble intentions, you can genuinely want to make things better, but if you execute poorly, if you don't think through the consequences, if you don't provide realistic pathways for compliance, if you don't consider how multiple policies interact with each other, you end up hurting the exact people you're trying to help. That's what happened here. California essentially created an impossible situation where companies couldn't afford to operate the same way, and workers got caught in the squeeze, trapped between policies that were supposed to help them and economic realities that made those policies backfire. And the frustrating thing is that this was predictable. Economists warned about this. Business groups raised concerns. Even some labor advocates pointed out the timing issues, said maybe we should phase this in differently, maybe we should provide more support, maybe we should study the combined impact before implementing everything at once. But those warnings got dismissed as corporate lobbying or fear-mongering or people trying to block progress. And now we're watching exactly what they predicted play out in real time. Workers are walking out not because Amazon suddenly became more greedy, but because the economic structure they're operating within fundamentally shifted, and nobody planned for the human cost of that shift. Here's what really worries me about this whole situation, and I say this as someone who genuinely believes workers deserve fair treatment and good wages and safe working conditions. California isn't learning from this experience. Instead of acknowledging the policy failures and working on actual solutions, instead of sitting down with workers and businesses and economists and figuring out how to fix this, we're seeing political theater. Officials are doubling down, blaming corporations, making promises that don't address the root cause, pointing fingers at everyone except